Hi guys, what's up? Welcome to the first review of the 2015 Formula One season, and we kick off with the Australian Grand Prix held at Albert Park in Melbourne. Now, the 2015 season had already been in the spotlight for a lot of reasons, right from the driver changes, rules and regulations, off-track controversies, and of course the pre-season testing. So after all of this, everyone was quite eager to see how the season shapes up, and it all began at Melbourne today. Now, talking about the race, it was quite intense, but also disappointing up to a certain extent. Lewis Hamilton led from pole to finish ahead of his teammate Nico Rosberg and Sebastian Vettel, who was debuting in red for the first time for Ferrari. Now, intense not because of Mercedes' domination from pole to finish, but mainly because of what was happening on track behind them, between the other manufacturers. Disappointing because only 11 cars managed to finish the race out of the proposed 20 entrants, basically due to reliability issues. Now, there were several questions raised over engine reliability during the pre-season testing, which seems to have extended into the first race. So the biggest losers today were Red Bull, Toro Rosso, Lotus and McLaren. Going into the pre-race details, there were quite a few changes in the starting grid when compared to what it looked like after yesterday's qualifying session. McLaren's Kevin Magnussen and Red Bull's Daniel Kvyat both failed to start with an engine failure en route to the starting grid. Apparently, large volumes of smoke were seen from the back of the McLaren, which brought an end to Magnussen's one-off race, who was seen replacing the injured Fernando Alonso for this race. Kvyat's car came to an abrupt halt while driving and was unable to restart, which meant that the Russian's Red Bull debut would be postponed until the next race in Malaysia. Williams driver Valtteri Bottas was unable to get to the starting grid on medical grounds as he sustained a back injury during qualification. Now, if you had seen yesterday's qualifying session, there was an incident where Bottas was seen losing control of the car near the starting straight, so that could have been a contributing factor to his back injury. He's had to spend the night at the hospital and wasn't deemed fit to race today morning, which was a huge blow to Williams' prospects of earning some well-earned points, taking into consideration their recent form. Also, Manuel Marussia's late re-entry into the sport prevented them from taking the starting grid as they continued desperately to get their car ready for the season, which meant that only 15 cars took to the starting grid out of the proposed 20 cars. Moving to the start of the race, Hamilton began his title defense in typical fashion with a quick start in front of several Aussie fans. Now, there was quite a bit of drama around turn 1 where the two Ferraris made contact, which meant that Raikkonen then tried to align himself back onto the racing line, which led Felipe and Massa to move away and nudge an accelerating past Maldonado. Now that resulted in the latter colliding with the barrier, and that ended his race. After the end of the first lap, Romain Grosjean also had to park his car due to an unknown technical issue. So that was the end of the race for the entire Lotus team, and they must be hugely disappointed by the result, taking into consideration the pace they displayed during qualifying and even during the pre-season testing. So the new safety car was out immediately, and it wasn't until the end of the third lap where racing resumed. Again, Hamilton was quick off the block and immediately pulled away from the rest of the pack. But the person who gained the most was Felipe Massa, who climbed up in front of Carlos Sainz Jr. into P5, and the battle for P5 was just beginning to get hot as Daniel Ricciardo, Sainz and Raikkonen were all lined up one behind another. Massa was the first to pit during lap 22, but immediately came out behind Daniel Ricciardo, which cost him a lot of precious time. Vettel meanwhile was quick to act and pitted in shortly later and came out in front of Massa, gaining a place. Hamilton then pitted in shortly later, exchanging his lead with Rosberg, who in turn gave it back to Hamilton during his turn to pit. Kimi Raikkonen's miserable outing turned worse when he came into pit and he had to face problems bolting on his left rear tire. That delayed his exit and dropped him down a few places. But that would turn out to be a blessing in disguise for the Finn, as he then began challenging Lewis Hamilton's lap timings from the back of the grid. Over the next few laps, Hamilton and Raikkonen would go on to exchange fastest lap times frequently until the Finn had to come back in for a second stop, which is where everything went downhill for him. Yet another problem bolting on his left rear tire meant an unsafe release for the Ferrari 2 number driver, and he subsequently had to retire from the race. Amidst all the action in the middle pack, McLaren's Jenson Button was a lone racer at the back of the grid. However, he did come close to a points finish due to all the retirements until Sergio Perez had other plans, who decided to battle it out with him. Perez eventually spun out at turn 3 while trying to outrace his former teammate, but that wouldn't keep the Mexican out for too long. In a few laps' time, he was right back behind Button and managed to edge him to secure the last point slot. There were also a few instances where Button was seen complaining over the tyres, but to top off his miserable race, Hamilton lapped his former teammate during the closing stages of the race. Absolutely gutted to see a former champion struggling to such extents. Talking about McLaren never really had the pace nor the reliability during the pre-season testing, but they did finish last today, so the team can take heart from finishing last on a day when most of the cars pulled out due to reliability issues. Come Malaysia, we hope and expect for a better outing for the team, as it marks the return of former world champion Fernando Alonso from injury. Now, the other debutant and the world's youngest Formula 1 driver, 17-year-old Max Verstappen, was enjoying a dream run until a mechanical failure forced him to park his car near the pit entry and retire from the race, quashing his dreams of getting a points finish. Nico Rosberg, meanwhile, all this time had been trying to close the gap between him and Hamilton. Hamilton seemed completely at ease and took a victory margin of 1.3 seconds over Nico. Vettel crossed the finishing line around 30 seconds after Nico in third. Massa came in fourth, backing 12 important points for his team. But the driver of the day, other than Lewis Hamilton, was certainly Felipe, who on his debut Formula 1 race staved off the likes of Ricciardo and Raikkonen to finish P5 and take 10 important points for his team. Marcus Ericsson, who complimented him by finishing 8th, so that certainly meant a fantastic way to end the week for Sauber, who were earlier embroiled in the Vandergaard controversy. Force India had a decent race but managed to get 7 points thanks to the reduced number of cars on track. So, the finishing grid looks like this: Hamilton, Rosberg, Vettel, Massa, Nasser, Ricciardo, Hülkenberg, Ericsson, Sainz, Perez and Button finishing last. Hamilton goes atop the Drivers' Championship with 25 points, followed by Nico at 18 points and Vettel at 15 points. The Constructors' table looks pretty deprived since many cars didn't finish the race, yet Mercedes are on top with a clean strike 43 points, followed by Ferrari at 15 and Sauber at 14 points. The venue was brought alive as Arnold Schwarzenegger took to conducting the post-race interview and looked in good spirits with all three drivers, especially Lewis Hamilton. Now there were reports that there were quite a few sparks flying between the German podium finishers, that is Sebastian Vettel and Nico Rosberg, during the post-race press conference. Apparently they weren't too happy with each other's post-race comments and decided to have a go at each other, though not physically, and it looks like Vettel was the winner. So yeah guys, that was a comprehensive review of the opening race, the Australian Grand Prix. Hope you guys liked it, and I'll be seeing you trackside at Sepang for the next one. Ciao, see you there.